Hello to everybody. My name is Michael Place. I'm the energy editor for Business News Americas based in Colombia. We're here today to talk about the 2022 intelligence series Oil and Gas Outlook Report, which has just been published. And I'm joined by my colleagues, João Montenegro in Brazil, our Argentine correspondent, Alan Brown, our Mexican reporter, Cristobal Riego, and our Andean, Central American and Caribbean writer, David Casellas. We will all endeavour to provide insights into what could happen in 2022 based on our research and the report which has just been republished, as I mentioned. And well, there's a lot to talk about. Let's begin with João in Brazil. João, will there be any new options in Brazil next year, and what can we expect in regards to the oil and gas sector?
Hi, Mike. Well, it's still an open question. Given the lower than expected results in the last tenders, the government has not confirmed the dates for the 18th concession round and the 7th production sharing tender yet. There are actually off-the-record talks about the possibility of tendering all areas via the open acreage program of the ANP, which is the local oil and gas watchdog. But this would require legislation changes through the National Congress, so it's a sensitive matter, at least when it comes to assets within the pre-salt polygon, which are the best oil and gas assets in Brazil.
Understood. What about the political risk posed by the presidential election, which I believe will occur in October? Is that right?
Well, I don't think contracts that are already signed would be under risk of being canceled or modified in case, for instance, a center-left or left-wing candidate like Lula or Ciro Gomes wins, because this is not typical of Brazil's track record. If this happens, if a center-left or a left-wing candidate wins, they would be more likely to make changes regarding future contracts, raising local content requirements for FPSO construction, for example. Anyway, both would probably try to use Petrobras as a means of national development, expanding its business plan, which could elevate the company's debt, besides reviewing and slowing down its divestment program.
Very interesting. Thanks for that insight, João. Moving along to Mexico, we have Cristobal Riego. What are the opportunities, Chris, for new oil and gas investment in Mexico now, given the current political climate? Is there any silver lining for the E&P sector?
Sure, Mike. So I would say that there is opportunity within the assets that have already been allocated to private players. There is a lot of political uncertainty at the moment regarding series of reforms that maybe we will talk later about, but in terms of what is already on the table, the silver lining for private players, I would say, is there are several large fields which are close to taking off in terms of production, which also would help the public opinion see sort of an advantage to having private players in the sector, because the Pemex always uses this as a reason to disincentivize private participation, the fact that they develop new fields faster than private players. So you have fields like Trion, the fields developed by Feelgood, Ichalkil and Pococh, which are shallow water. You have companies like Pantera who are developing onshore gas potential. So there are opportunities in those areas. Sadly, there's also the political cloud of the taking over of the Sama field by Pemex, which was one of the most promising private fields.
Okay, and will AMLO succeed in his attempt to amend the constitution to reform the energy sector? And what would that mean for the oil and gas industry, especially private investors?
Sure. So regarding whether it will succeed or not, of course, we do not know. The probability is looking slimmer because the talks with the only opposition party who seems open to support the reform, which is the Free Party, the traditional conservative party, have not been going too well. They went Ori, in terms of negotiating the latest budget proposal, the government did not include any of the proposals or changes. And so the discussion is now postponed to after next year's governor elections, which are in June. So after that, we expect the discussion to really start heating up. And the government does require the support of at least three in the lower house if it is to pass the reform. In terms of what it will mean for the oil and gas sector, the reform eliminates two regulators, the CRE and CNH, which both play important roles in the oil and gas sector. CNH oversees upstream regulation, permitting, approvals, padding approvals, all like that, and the CRE oversees downstream. So it would generally undermine independence and reliability of the regulatory side.
Great, thanks for that, Chris. So there are some concerns in Mexico. Moving along to Argentina, where we have Alan Brown. Alan, one of the focuses of the Argentine government in 2022 is expected to be its hydrocarbons promotion bill. What does that involve, and how could it benefit investors?
One of the chief or the principal focuses of the hydrocarbons bill is boosting production and exports. At the moment, we're talking chiefly oil, because in terms of gas, because of transport restrictions, it's difficult to expand gas production that much, but oil, yes. So I think it's oil is like the chief focus of this bill that's in Congress. Boosting production, boosting outputs, obviously, and exports, sorry, obviously to bring more dollars into the country, help steady the ship.
Okay, that makes sense. And how important is the proposed Nestor Kirchner pipeline to Argentina, and will it move forward in 2022?
That's the one everyone's watching, because if that goes ahead, that will kind of, you would expect, would give the kind of a green light to producers to start planning on really ramping up production. Again, like the off-takers, Chile, Brazil, obviously LNG would need a lot of money, which doesn't seem forthcoming at the moment. But to answer your question in simple terms, it's hugely important for the gas sector to kind of ease that bottleneck that there is in the Neuquén basin, Vaca Muerta.
Thanks, Alan. Moving along to Colombia, one of the big questions in Colombia is if the country will move ahead with its fracking pilot projects, which were awarded during late last year and earlier this year to both ExxonMobil and to Ecopetrol. Both of these companies have their licenses, but they're waiting for, they have their drilling licenses, but they're waiting for their environmental permits. And they're expected to be approved in the middle of next year, and drilling is expected to start late next year. But it's important to keep in mind that even though these pilots will likely have the green light to go ahead, the Council of State, which is the country's highest administrative tribunal, has in place a moratorium or a ban on commercial scale fracking. So we're still unsure about the long-term future of fracking in Colombia, irrespective of the pilot projects. Another big issue in Colombia, as it is in Brazil, is the presidential election, which is going to happen in May, the first round in May, the second round in June. Now, the current government has been really proactive in pushing incentives to promote investment in oil and gas, which remains Colombia's largest export industry. And the front runner for the election is a leftist, Gustavo Petro, who has said that he plans to stop exploration drilling and turn Ecopetrol into a renewable energy company. So oil and gas companies are feeling a little bit uneasy about this election. So moving along now to the Andean region, where we have David Casallas. David, speaking of political risk, the Andean region of Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador seem to be facing headwinds on this front. Do you see much of the same in 2022?
Well, hi, Mike. We should expect that the challenges to governability will continue into 2022. basically because of the subregion's fractured political landscape and growing social discontent and also polarization. We've seen that social actors have been capitalizing on, you might call it the void or vacuum left by political infighting, which has opened the door wider to unrest as communities increase pressure on authorities to address unmet demands, especially development shortfalls, many of which came to the forefront during the pandemic. In the case of Peru, for example, there's growing confrontation, above all in the mining and hydrocarbon sectors. And in fact, just in these past few days, the government announced it was moving ahead with mine closures due to alleged complaints of environmental shortfalls that have been highlighted by communities in the areas. And you also have the issue of the paralyzation of the Nor-Peruano oil pipeline, which has been offline since October 4th as communities pressure for authorities and other stakeholders to address what they call are pledges that haven't been met for social development infrastructure. And just to mention a few numbers, the information from the country's ombudsman shows that the number of active social conflicts grew for a third consecutive month in October, when 8 new conflicts were registered. And protests also hit a year high in October. And all this is accompanied also by increasing calls by industry for the state to increase or greater resolve to engage communities. And I think in the case of Bolivia and Ecuador, we'll continue to see sporadic protests, unrest, more in the line of macro policies. For example, Ecuador has a state of emergency in place after protests related to a proposed fuel price increase. And in Bolivia, you also see the opposition continuing to challenge the President Arce's macro policies, and which even led the government to repeal the law that targeted illicit profits, but which most agree was more of an intent of the government to grant extraordinary powers to the state.
Great, thank you, David. Moving to the Caribbean region, you again, David. I guess the main focus of our report, or one of the main focuses of our report, is the Caribbean region, and offshore Guyana is considered to be one of the global hotspots for oil and gas exploration. What are some of the major developments that are expected to advance in Guyana and, for that matter, in the Caribbean region in 2022?
Right. Well, I guess the big project in 2022 will be the continuing build-out expansion of the country's flagship project, the offshore Starbrook block, and the related Liza field. After having come online in the end of 2019, the first phase with 120,000 barrels per day, we expect that the second phase of Liza with the Unity FPSO is due to come online in the coming months with 220,000 barrels per day. And also in 2022, we expect development of the third and fourth phases of Starbrook, which are the Payara and Yellowtail. In the case of Payara, that entails a 220,000 barrel per day FPSO, and Yellowtail will increase with an FPSO of 250,000 barrels per day. And in recent weeks, Yellowtail has awarded projects, for example, to SBMF Offshore and Technip FMC for related contracts. And other blocks we should be taking a closer look at are the offshore areas Canuco and Quarantine. And in a related Starbrook development, there also should be headway made with plans to land natural gas onshore from Starbrook with the proposed gas to power project, and also the eventual use of natural gas into other industrial uses.
There is a lot happening in Guyana. Thank you, David. On the Caribbean topic, do you see any other possible opportunities for E&P investment in the region over the next year or two, possibly in Suriname or in Trinidad?
Sure. I did forget to mention that in recent weeks, Guyana's vice president announced the possibility of launching either a formal licensing round or some other scheme to offer blocks that have been relinquished in the country to new operators. But again, this will be conditioned by potential changes to the regulatory and legislative framework. Over in Trinidad and Tobago, the Energy Ministry plans to launch licensing rounds for onshore, shallow water, and deep water acreage. And in terms of the onshore call, the nomination process is already underway for 11 blocks. And in Suriname, there is work with multi-seismic contracts being awarded to prepare potential acreage for to be offered to operators in 2023.
Great, thank you, David. That's all we have time for today. So thank you to João, Alan, Cristobal, and David for your great insights into the oil and gas sector and the outlook for 2022. Thank you for joining us. To our listeners, our subscribers, we invite you to check our report, which I've mentioned has just been published on our platform, and we look forward to providing our usual coverage of the oil and gas sector for you in 2022. Thank you very much.